I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like. I Mix What I Like.org, at I Mix What I Like for all your relevant social media. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to host what is, for me, again, another exciting chance to have a conversation about, well, with a couple of people who have written reviews of the recent book by David Garrow, about Barack Obama, Rising Star, the making of Barack Obama. One is familiar, very familiar to our crew, part of the I Mix What I Like crew and extended brotherhood, Todd Stephen Burroughs, Dr. Todd Stephen Burroughs, who is a longtime professor of journalism, journalist. He writes for the Atlanta Black Star. He writes for Drums in the Global Village. He writes for The Root. And of course, he works with us here at I Mix What I Like. And he has written a piece recently published in Atlanta Black Star called How and Why Barack Obama Purposefully Learned the Wrong Lessons from Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. Dr. Burroughs, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Ball.
And joining us also by video is Paul Street, a longtime independent radical democratic policy researcher, journalist, historian, author, and speaker, whose work can be found at paulstreet.org. He has written a number of books on Barack Obama himself, including the one I'm most familiar with, Barack Obama and the Future of American Politics. But he has also written a review published recently in Counterpunch called, a review that is of Garrow's book, Rising Star, Making of Barack Obama. And his piece is titled Obama, a Hollow Man Filled with Ruling Class Ideas. Paul Street, welcome to I Mix What I Like.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Burroughs, Todd, my man, let's start with you. And let me just ask you very simply what you meant there in your title. And if you could just summarize what it is that you're saying you learned from Garrow's book about Obama, and specifically what it is you're saying Obama took from both King and Malcolm X.
Thank you, Dr. Ball, and I'm happy to be in the tradition of the unseen DJ from BET. I don't know if you remember that back in the day, right?
The disembodied
right. Yeah, the unseen. I forgot his name because I'm the unseen DJ. Right? I'm the one who's not Donnie Simpson. Right? What I tried to say in this review was that Barack Obama was pretty much laid bare in a mainstream way, admittedly, by David Garrow, who for some reason didn't want to quote Paul Street and other people from the radical left and the black left who made very strong critiques. I mean, somehow Garrow forgot those people, but he does in a very mainstream way critique Barack Obama as saying that he's, nothing but a black version of Bill Clinton, and that he is somebody who sacrificed any principles he had, any politics he may have had, for power. And what's even more tragic is that the politics he had were, pretty much a moderate, middle of the road, almost even conservative politics to get the power that he had. And so Obama's use of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, as documented by Garrow, his use of Malcolm X is that he enjoyed the personal transformation of Malcolm X, what Dr. Ball and I would call the life or lie of reinvention of Malcolm X. So he uses the reinvention factor of Malcolm X to reinvent himself into this character by the name of Barack Obama, a retroactive black man, right? A Hawaiian who retroactively becomes black so that he can go be in politics. And what Garrow also argues is that he, takes Martin Luther King as some sort of civic do-gooder. There's even one point in the documentary in the book where he refers to King as a politician, which is very disturbing, to say the least. So I simply point these contradictions out and say that, unfortunately, I'm afraid that younger black politicians will read Garrow not as the cautionary tale it is, but as a handbook on how to succeed in America and how to win friends and influence people.
So, Paul Street, let me bring you into the conversation. You describe Obama in the title of your piece as a hollow man. I know that is something that you picked up, at least in terms of phrasing, from David Garrow. But let me give you your chance to tell us in summary what you found and why you think Garrow's book is important, and maybe what you think it may or may not be lacking.
Yeah, well, let me add that I sort of knew Obama. I had some dealings with him back in the days in Chicago. And people forget how unpopular, back when I was research director at the Chicago Urban League, people forget how unpopular and sort of standoffish Obama was viewed to be by much of Black Chicago. It's sort of a forgotten history. And Garrow gets some of that. But, you know, look, at one level, Garrow's biography is just an epic, you know, accomplishment in ways that aren't surprising to anybody that read Bearing the Cross, which was his also massive tome, you know. I mean,
About Dr. King.
yeah, about Dr. King, right? His biography of Dr. King. I mean, I don't know how he managed to keep my attention. He did over, you know, more than 1,000 pages. I mean, this book needed to be delivered on my front porch by a forklift. I mean, this thing is just it's just gigantic. At one point in the book, he quotes Obama, referring to his first book. Well, Obama's written 2 books, and they're both about Barack Obama. That's very characteristic of the Obama that portrayed. But at one point, you know, Obama refers to his first book, Dreams from My Father, as the bane of my existence. Well, you know, this book sort of became the bane of my existence. I was trying to get through this massive tome. One of it's just an epic of accomplishment of primary source research. This guy has interviewed hundreds of people. I mean, there isn't a day of Barack Obama's life. I mean, this biography literally begins with his conception, you know, up through his tendency to the presidency. I mean, and it is just covered in astounding detail. And I kept going. You know, I'm gonna take off 100 pages here and just skip through it. I just can't take it anymore. And yet he would get me with a story. So there's something he's got a gift. He's a great writer. But he falls for a just kind of psychological theory of what was wrong with the Obama presidency. It's just all kind of, you know, this book could almost be subtitled The Revenge of Sheila Jagger, which was Obama's third major premarital and white, I guess she's technically Asian American, girlfriend. And she's given an incredible amount of space in this biography. Garrow has this kind of fascination with the love life and even the sex life of his subjects. This was true with the King biography, and it's certainly true here. And in Jagger's case, he's interviewed her at length, and he sort of works up along with some of Obama's previous white female lovers. He's worked up this kind of image of Obama as kind of a coward, as kind of a narcissist, as kind of a hollow guy who really doesn't know who he's about. And he sort of quotes Jagger at length at the end about this is why he wasn't a great president, and he gave in to the right wing and never really did the progressive things and he never was great as Sheila Jagger hoped he would be. And sort of what's missing here, I think, is the accuracy of the very early dead-on assessment of Obama by Dr. Adolph Reed Jr., black left radical political science professor who was at Northwestern at the time when Obama came up in Chicago, you know, and who I think just brilliantly described Obama as a vacuous to repressive, you know, neoliberal, where sort of the middle class politics of the foundation world converges with identity politics, you know, for this kind of talk of small scale solutions without systemic change. And, you know, and that's missing, and how Obama gets this neoliberal, right-wing, conservative, business-friendly worldview from the foundation world, from Harvard, you know, maybe even from Columbia University, these great ruling class and professional class finishing institutions. There's no ruling class. There's no elite behind Obama shaping Obama really in Garrow's biography, and I think that's where he fails. It's a brilliant heroic achievement in terms of personal portrayal, and a sort of great failure this book is in terms of ideological appraisal and class analysis and power analysis. And all the leftists, many of us who tried desperately to warn people about the Obama phenomenon and what it was really about, and that it was very much about what Reed said, the vacuous to repressive neoliberalism, were all pretty much missing. One of the ironies of this book, to wrap up my over long-winded assessment here, one of the ironies of the book, though, is that it is so thorough and so remarkably researched that you really can sort of tease out the fact that Obama very early on, even before he ever gets a campaign contribution, is this kind of very centrist and neoliberal imperial candidate. Garrow never says that, but it's kind of there. You can find it.
Well, I didn't get into the book quite to the level that you have, but in what I have read, I felt very vindicated in the conclusions I had reached long ago, and that many of us had reached long ago, that are supported by the very mainstream center Democratic Republican Party establishment resources that Garrow uses. And I've always been fascinated by that, in fact, that many of the so-called radical conclusions of the so-called left are actually logical and validated by the very substance and the content of what we are given by the mainstream. So when I read at least a good portion of this book, I mean, several hundred pages, not quite nowhere that you did, Paul Street, but again, I felt very vindicated. And Todd, let me bring you back into the conversation, because I always remind people that it is an email I sent you the night of the Democratic Party convention, National Convention in 2004, when Obama gave that speech that now infamous, there's no Black America, no white America, no Latin America, just in America. I emailed you that night and said, this dude is a problem. And then immediately I became familiar with the work of Bruce Dixon and Glenn Ford at Black Agenda Report, who also, Bruce from his days in Chicago, also has this background experience. And they were among the first voices saying, hey man, this guy is not the black radical civil rights extended savior that many people are starting to suggest he is, and that many black people started to hope he would be. He is, in fact, a problem that he is sponsored by a ruling elite, an establishment, and that I read in your book, Paul Street, where he was taken and vetted at wine parties, and they said he's black but not civil rights black. He's not going to scare people. So Todd, one of the things I wanted to just ask you to help us remember and maybe bring back from the piece you wrote for Atlanta Black Star is that for me, my memory is that talking bad or even critically of Barack Obama in 2004 and up even until really recently was talking bad about him then is like talking bad about Beyonce now. That there was a huge backlash of black and establishment mainstream voices in particular who were saying, no, we got to give this guy a chance. We have to let him in. We have to let this extension of our struggle and move towards revolution occur. And the rest of you who are being too critical need to stop hating. In fact, even Mary Baraka got at us for being critical of Obama at the time. If you could maybe say a few words about what you remember of that incident or that moment in time, and then talk a little bit about more what you said in this piece about what he did and did not take from that same civil rights tradition to which he was being, I think, falsely attached from very early on.
I mean, as we've talked about, Dr. Ball, personally many times, Newark has a tradition of radical black pragmatism, and we would have to have a whole nother discussion about how Newarkers view Obama and how Miles Baraka views Obama and how he runs. That would be a very long discussion. What I would like to say to answer your question, though, and I think Mr. Street might agree with me here, is that Obama was very intelligent in terms of his use of symbolism. And Obama made sure, like there's even a point in the book, and if I'm wrong on this, Mr. Street, please correct me. There's a point in the book where Obama even retroactively tries to create a relationship with Derek Bell, who he barely knew at Harvard, and he may have been pushed out to say a couple of kind words at a rally about Derek Bell or whatever. But he writes this sort of note to Derek Bell saying, you were a major inspiration for me to come to Harvard, and Derek Bell thought this was crazy. Like, okay, we don't know each other. So how are you writing this note? And Garrow points it out. Now, Garrow is very sophisticated in terms of his writing style because he puts the disappointments throughout the narrative. Like, so you see the forthcoming disappointments are there. And as Mr. Street is saying, in its mainstream way, it clearly delineates how he created himself. Barack Obama used symbolism the way Bill Clinton used symbolism for his community, right? Bill Clinton exploited a community's need for JFK. Barack Obama exploited a community's need for Martin Luther King. And I think Garrow does a good job at calling it out. And he does quote Adolph Reed, but I agree with Mr. Street in that, Adolph Reed's perspective is not the primary perspective.
No, and Paul, as you point out in your piece, Adolph Reed is quoted to be dismissed as part of the radical left lunacy that is meant to distinguish Barack Obama and give him his own special place. Because that was one of the biggest problems I had with Garrow's book, or I have with Garrow's book, is that as comprehensive as it is, it feels like he goes out of his way to avoid all of the left-leaning and black community, in particular, criticism of Barack Obama. And I will say, we have a lot of it warehoused at imixwhatilike.org, including all the great Harlem debates from CMO-TAP, and we have the debate we have with Amiri Baraka, and we have an interview with Derek Bell, the late Derek Bell, before he passed, where he tells everybody, Obama's not quite the guy you think he is, but, I'm not going to get too much into it. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. To prove your point on this, Jared, Tavis Smiley's criticism of Barack Obama is not in this book.
Yeah, that's deep. Now, that's pretty deep, because that Tavis is pretty mainstream as it goes. But Paul Street, I want you to respond to that, but I wanted to have you respond to all of that, or any of that you like, in the context of asking you, and then Todd, I'm going to come back and ask you the same thing. Paul, you mentioned this in your piece, and I wanted to see if we can, if I can, I think this question will get done what I wanted to have done. What does the attempted payoff of Reverend Wright signify for you in terms of who Obama is or was as a politician or is as a political figure, and this sort of relationship to what we're all saying here about this relationship, both in real and in fiction, to Derek Bell and to the so-called, and to the left itself. But you talk about it? What does the attempted payoff of Reverend Wright say about that? And if you would remind our audience of what that was.
Well, Obama. I think that Todd Stephen Burroughs was absolutely right. There is this. Garrow does a very good job of showing how Obama quite strategically and intelligently crafts a black identity out for political purposes, out of a actual biography that he has that really isn't all that black American, and it's not just about Derek Bell. Obama creates a fake image that none of his former adolescent cohorts can remember in Honolulu at the Punahou Academy, of this sort of thug-like, super alienated black existence that he supposedly had there. And it turns out he didn't really have that existence at all. He creates an image of himself as being racially tortured and simultaneously a leading anti-apartheid activist at Occidental College. And then, against South African racist apartheid. And so it extends that to Colombia too. And people from the time say, no, he wasn't particularly involved in the anti-apartheid struggle here. There's no doubt about it that Sheila Jagger's got to go, because to fulfill his political destiny of rising up in the electoral system, he's decided he's got to have a black wife, and she's got to go because of there. So there is this careful construction of a racial identity. The Hawaii experience, the Indonesia experience growing up, was really quite atypical and not particularly black American. He had to sort of create that. Now he becomes electable in part because he's black, actually, ironically enough, but black, but not like Jesse. He's a certain kind of black American. I had fascinating discussions with white upper middle class professionals in a campus town, Iowa City, in 2007 and 2008. And they were so proud of themselves, right? They were ready to vote for a black guy. This was a real good cause for them to be able to pat themselves on their back. But not any black candidate. Barack Obama was a guess who's coming to dinner presidential.
He's the get out candidate. That's why he was so he was so affectionately spoken of in Get Out.
The relationship with Reverend Wright, which had been calculated in part to create the acceptance in black middle-class Chicago and to be part of the black South Side and fulfill that destiny, became problematic in the general, in the primaries. Hillary Clinton was exploiting it because the pulpit master was quite left, in a lot of stuff he said about U.S. foreign policy, and he said about U.S. domestic policy, and he said about racism in the country. So the payoff of the attempted payoff, because Wright refuses it, of Wright to say to him in March of 2008, when Hillary Clinton is crucifying Obama with Reverend Wright, say, just please stop talking, and it's very sophisticated. It wasn't just crude, here's some money. No, he says he goes and asks him politely, please stop talking. He gets refused, and then a couple days later, Reverend Wright gets an email from one of Obama's black bourgeois friends in Chicago offering him $150,000. Very slick, right? But very crass, and hell of a story, isn't it? How's that for progressive hope and change?
And again, Todd, I'll begin to wrap us up here, and I'll ask you to give your concluding thoughts. But I want to, with that same sort of question, that example, that the distancing of Reverend Wright, the attempt to pay off Reverend Wright, to have him to not speak so much so that Obama can be elected, says something about what he was trying to be and what Garrow was trying to clarify for any of those who were unclear up until this point, what Obama was, and maybe why, as Paul was just saying, we haven't seen the hope and change that he ran on in 08 and to a lesser extent, again, in 12.
Well, Reverend Wright is a stand-in for Louis Farrakhan. It's not a complicated dynamic. So his doing an Atlanta Compromise speech, right, a modern day Atlanta Compromise speech, where he equates, white supremacy and its effect on African Americans with, white alienation. That's really not surprising, and it fits well within the character of a man who Garrow says over and over again, in literally, maybe 20 pages if you just kind of parse it out. He says over and over again, his law school students loved him because he took all sides of a position and they didn't know what he believed. That is said again and again in Garrow's book. So it's very consistent. Now, as far as Sheila Jager is concerned, Garrow needed something new, right? Jared, you and I understand this in terms of biography and dealing with Manning Marable. You always have to bring something new to the table. So what Garrow brings new to the table is Sheila Jager and kind of using her as a tragic figure to make Obama a tragic figure. So she represents, according to Garrow, the road not taken. I think it's a bit more complicated than Garrow makes it, but, Garrow uses Sheila Jager as the symbol of consistency and integrity that Obama has lost. And I think those things are important to talk about and discuss. And what he did with Reverend Wright is consistent with what he did before and what he's done after.
Well, you can't be the first black president and have a white mother and a half-white girlfriend. And so it was clear that Obama needed to, as I think the Garrow book makes clear, blacken himself up, both in terms of his narrative history or biographical history, but also in terms of his church and his wife, so that he could be seen. Because remember, there was that George Washington University study that showed that black women only voted for Obama because of the particular blackness of his wife and the particular complexion of his wife, not Obama so much himself. He needed that added bonus. Paul, let me give you any last words that you have if you want to leave us with anything about.
Well, and meanwhile, with all that going on, what doesn't seem to make it into Rising Star is that Wall Street and K Street and the connection between the financial ruling class, they're falling in love with Obama. So, how do you talk about the rise of Obama and don't mention Robert Rubin at least once? The kingmaker, right, from Goldman Sachs, who opens the floodgates, and Obama sets fundraising records with them. That just doesn't seem to be there. At the same time, they're not there. The left-wing people, all the folks, many of us who warned about this and talked about the real character, the people who, just like you, heard that speech on that keynote address in 2004 and said, watch out, this is a problem. There's a bunch of us, Bruce Dixon, Glenn Ford, me, Margaret Kimberly, Doug Henwood wrote about it. Alexander Coburn wrote brilliantly, and the late Alexander Coburn, and acerbically about Obama, and we just aren't there. Bruce is mentioned in the biography. I'm mentioned in the biography, but not our left critiques.
Todd, I did want to ask, and I will give you the last word on this question. Todd, what does, because part of this, I admit, was for me childish and humorous, that I loved reading this Garrow book or what I've read of it to just selfishly feel vindicated on some level that there was some popular recognition of the correctness of many of our positions, as Paul just sort of outlined. But as also Paul outlined, he doesn't go deep enough into all the major problems that are represented in Obama. And one of those problems that I wanted to ask you, Todd, to close this out is, what does this actually say about the state of our political organization or activism or acumen, or the state of politics for black and well-meaning people beyond that? I mean, the fact that Obama could be elected twice, that he could be in many ways being represented to us as a heroic figure, particularly in light of Donald Trump's presidency. What do you think that Garrow's book may, and the fact of Obama politically, may be saying about our where we are politically?
Dr. Ball, I wish I could give you a sophisticated answer, but the only answer I can give you is that I made the mistake of reading this book after reading Martin Duberman's biography of Paul Robeson. And in Paul Robeson and his Land of Robeson, we see Black people with their full imaginations. We see Black people able to view the entire world and their place in it. And understanding that the one system that they're in does not necessarily mean that system belongs to the world. It's a one system, and it should be either reformed or destroyed. What I say in my article is that Michelle and Barack Obama are the result of a lack of our imagination. And it comes from our leaders being killed and imprisoned and isolated, and people like Paul Street being intellectually isolated. But it also comes from this idea that America now belongs to us. Now, fortunately for us, in many ways, we now see that America did not belong to us. And Trump makes that very clear. It does not mean, however, that we're going to redevelop the imagination we once had. And I think Garrow's book shows that we need to reimagine ourselves differently, or else the path that he outlines is the path we're going to go down.
Jared, I should have told you the story from the white left of Amy Goodman shutting me down after Obama was elected and before the inauguration.
Well, come on, man. Well, let's go. I got literally 3 minutes. I got to have it. Go ahead. Tell me about that.
I was booked. My publisher helped send me out there to New York City. It was Todd mentioning intellectual isolation that reminded me of the story. And I was staying with my friends in Montclair, New Jersey. And I got on a little bus and I rolled into Port Authority. And it was about 15 degrees out there. And I was out there on 6th Avenue and the phone rang. And I was going down there to Greenwich Village, wherever their studio was. And this intern came on and said that you've been canceled, and I'll never forget. She said, "Is that okay? Is that all right?" It's a big deal. I flew out there through a blizzard and everything else. And, but no hint of reschedule or any other kind of thing. Juan and Amy had to take off. And, I found out since it's kind of just the middle class. This is democracy now, right? This is the left. Middle-class viewers were probably not going to be happy with hearing someone predicting what this presidency was going to be.
Well, as I said to you before, and I'll say it here publicly as well, that when I was working with the Real News Network and we had you on during last year's presidential election to offer a left critique of Bernie Sanders, there was a lot of backlash against that, and we were never allowed to have you, or never encouraged to have you back on again. And that line of questioning was never revisited by anybody else. And that's always how I kind of know something's up, that it's not just personal. It isn't just that Paul isn't good enough or Jared isn't good enough. It's that the line of questioning is never taken up by anybody who may be by others seen to be more qualified to do it. So anyway, but thank you for sharing that. And that's another one of the problems that we always have to address, the apparent limitations of the so-called left. But thank you for that. Well, Todd Stephen Burroughs, Paul Street, thank you both very much for joining me for this conversation. We encourage people to check out their latest pieces on David Garrow's book, both in Counterpunch and the Atlanta Black Star, paulstreet.org, Drums in the Global Village, I mixwhatilike.org for all of their work and more. Thank you again to the both of you for joining us. And to the rest of you, we say thanks to you. And as always, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it, as did Fred Hampton. And we'll catch you in the whirlwind. Thanks, everybody. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.